So picture this, you're a Nintendo kid in the mid-2000s, blissfully unaware of Sega's long history as console manufacturers, but you also happen to pick up Sonic Adventure DX for your GameCube. And then there's this funny pinball area in one of the levels that's very clearly not from Sonic. It's got this really distinct music and features this weird purple character. And as time passes, you just keep seeing them, known as NiGHTS, and they show up in lots of other Sonic games. They share a pinball game on GBA, show up on billboards in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and they're even playable in Sonic Riders. For a long time, that was my extent of exposure to the NiGHTS character and world, and it's something that really stuck with me as years went on during the era of the GameCube. NiGHTS is a short-lived series from Sonic Team that originally launched on the Sega Saturn years before I was ever introduced to them. NiGHTS' unique design always stuck out to me, and their appearances in other Sega games made it really hard to forget what they were. And with countless cameos throughout the years, I'd always had this impression that the games were a lot more important to Sega than I would have otherwise assumed. NiGHTS just felt so mysterious to me at the time, and I've always been curious to go back and try them out for myself. Lately, I've been messing around a lot with the Sega Saturn and getting into that whole world, and so I thought it was time to finally go and play the NiGHTS series. There were only 2 NiGHTS games released, being NiGHTS Into Dreams on Sega Saturn and NiGHTS Journey of Dreams on the Wii. There was also a sort of bonus version for the Saturn known as Christmas NiGHTS, and we're going to take a look at that too. I've never meaningfully given these games a shot until today, and so I hope you'll join me as I take a look at the entire NiGHTS series for the first time. Before we dive into NiGHTS Into Dreams, let's start with a little bit of a backstory. In the 90s, when the Saturn launched, Sonic Team wanted to make a brand new IP to take a break from the Sonic trilogy that they'd wrapped up on the Genesis. Something to not only match Sonic, but demonstrate the new things that only the Saturn was capable of. They started developing a game around the concept of flight, and settled on a dream world, where players could fly around with the new analog stick controller that they were developing in tandem with the game. Sonic X-treme was meant to release around the same time as NiGHTS, so that the Saturn could catch up to PlayStation and Nintendo. But after Sonic's cancellation, NiGHTS was the closest thing Sega had to a brand new Sonic game. Eventually, Sonic would see some compilations and spin-offs for the Saturn, but there was never a true, full-fledged Sonic game released for the console. All of that leads us to the release of NiGHTS Into Dreams, and despite fantastic reviews, it just wasn't enough to bring the Sega Saturn back into the spotlight. At least that's the story I get from reading old reviews and magazines. Speaking for myself, I feel like NiGHTS kind of represents the Saturn in a lot of ways, and it kind of defines what most people, I would assume, think of the console. With a unique main character and visual style that really captures the energy of Sega at the time. For the record, I'll be playing this on an original Saturn with a Saru cart installed. I was trying to get a physical copy of NiGHTS Into Dreams for the video, but Saturn games are prohibitively expensive, and I just actually couldn't find one. I did manage to find a copy of Christmas NiGHTS and a 3D controller, so it's going to be as close to the experience from 1996 as I could possibly manage. As far as I know, the Saru will run the games identically to how a disc would run, with slightly better loading times. Jumping straight in, I don't think I've had an experience quite like booting up NiGHTS for the very first time without any context. The opening cutscene offers the slightest hint as to what this game's about, and the name and design obviously implies nightmares and dreams, but actually playing the game feels like a trip. There's so much color and stuff happening on the screen that, compared to modern standards, it can feel like you're not even playing a real game. You start a level playing as either of these 2 kids and walk around this neon green field, and then an arrow points you over to NiGHTS. You touch this temple thing that they're sitting in, and then you're off, flying through rings and collecting orbs. I can't emphasize the amount of just overwhelming stimuli, just so much going on, and it's a lot to take in. But I have to say that stumbling through my first level in NiGHTS, I was still having a really good time without really knowing what I was doing, and I decided the best thing to do was open up the manual and figure out what was going on. The story of Nights into Dreams follows two kids that I mentioned earlier. They're named Elliot and Clarice. Each of them have been having anxieties about aspects of their lives. Clarice wants to be a singer but is afraid of being judged, and Elliot wants to play basketball and is afraid of getting dunked on. But while each of them rest easy at night, the world of dreams known as NiGHTopia is in danger. A sorcerer of some sort known as Wise Man the Wicked has created the Nightmarin to steal dream energy from humans, and if he succeeds, he could take over the world. A NiGHTopian manages to bring Elliot and Clarice to their world in order to save them, and feeling the courage inside them grow, they each decide to help save NiGHTopia. The two kids' stories are separate with their own levels and story, but you can bounce between them as you see fit. To defeat Wiseman, they have to recover 4 types of energy found in these orbs called ideas, which have been stashed away in big machines called idea captures. So in every level, you start as Elliot or Clarice, and the Nightmarin steal your 4 ideas, leaving you stranded in the dream world. To recover them, you need the help of Knights, one of the only Nightmarin not under Wiseman's control, who is apparently drawn to the bravery of the children. When you reach Knights in these gazebo-looking things, you take control and properly begin the level. So that's a lot of ground to cover, but the story is mostly just told in the manual, with these CGI cutscenes sort of supplementing them. The world is pretty expansive, and the story is surprisingly detailed, considering most of these CGI cutscenes are just 5 seconds long with no dialogue. I can't hate on it, but the delivery is definitely a little strange and dated. I think in the years since this game released, like considering it's been almost 30 years, it's got this very unique sense of sincerity, but also hopeless confusion. Knights also is a character that I find to be really charming in their own right, but they do also have that really strange quality to them. Their design is instantly iconic in my opinion, and lovably Sega, but also weird and horrifying at the same time. You might assume that they look a little funny because of, the early 3D CGI, but no, they just are weird. The Wii iteration did clear up some of those weird rough edges, but in this version on Saturn, they have these weird skinny human hands and large beady lizard eyes. Of course, Knights is supposed to be strange, but cool and ambiguous at the same time, and in doing that, I think they nailed it. I can't think of many other characters that quite look and feel like Knights, and I think that their design is a big part of why I find them so memorable. So like I said, once you make contact with Knights, you get to fly around and start the main gameplay loop. Here you can rotate the stick or use the D-pad to fly in any direction in a 2.5D side-scrolling setup. Pressing the buttons allows you to do a dash and pick up some speed, and you can hit the triggers to do some tricks, though they're mostly just for fun. Much like the early Sonic games, that's about it. Everything else you do in Knights is entirely contextual and based on objects in the levels. I played through the game with both the standard Saturn pad, and I also went through with that 3D controller as well. I think the movement with the usual controller gets the job done, but it's pretty clear that Knights was made specifically for this strange proto-Dreamcast controller. With the circular shape and stiff control stick, you might think it's uncomfortable, but it's actually pretty natural to use. Credit where it's due, this game can feel really great to play sometimes, in a lot of the similar ways that the Sonic games can when they're at their best. Once you have a handle on the controls, you'll be bouncing around objects, flying through rings, and just having a good time moving fast. And even if you mess something up, the game is usually forgiving enough to just let it go. Your goal in each level is to fly through the course and grab 20 of these orbs in order to return to the idea capture and bust it open. Once that's done, you can return to where you started to drop off the idea, at which point you'll be able to fly along to the next course. Since the game is controlled like a side-scroller in a 3D space, it can be a bit distracting to see collectibles from other tracks in the background of your current level, but with enough time you'll learn the layouts. I also felt like the camera was just a little too close at times, and moving it back a little bit would have helped a lot with navigating the levels. Memorization is really your friend here. After running through 4 tracks in a stage, you get put into a boss fight, and if you can clear that, then you'll unlock the next level. Most of the bosses are really simple and easy, but a few can be kind of obtuse and frustrating to figure out what to do. The first boss, Gilwing, is just a giant head that flies in circles, and it's super easy to just run into him and knock the head off and do that, 10 times to win. But then there's like this card guy with this attack that's really annoying to dodge and got me kicked out of the stage a few times. Once you get the rhythm down, it's not too bad. Most of the bosses are simple, but on the first go around, it can be kind of confusing to just find out what you're trying to do. When I eventually finished every level for each of the 2 kids, I realized that I wasn't able to play the final level. That's because NiGHTS has an intricate ranking system, and if you can't get at least a C in every level, then you can't play the final stage. So let's talk a bit about the scoring system. Without getting too far into the weeds, NiGHTS at its core is an incredibly deep, arcadey score attack game. Your surface level goal was to get the 20 orbs, get the idea, and beat the boss, but in reality, you have to get those orbs as fast as possible to activate the bonus timer, and then it's a mad dash to scoop up as many points as you can while linking them together in combos before your time runs out. Every stage is actually built like a racetrack that loops in on itself, and you can loop around them as many times as you want as long as you hit home base and cash in your score before running out of time. This stuff is textbook risk and reward gameplay, and it makes the levels in NiGHTS incredibly fun to replay. You need to know the course, figure out exactly how and where to score the most points, and then wager that against how long it'll take you to complete the lap. If you don't make it back to the shrine in time, then you'll fall out of the sky and lose all of your points. Scoring points is also based on your knowledge of every track, where some levels have gimmicks that you'll need to take advantage of to earn a higher score. There are things like these water balls that NiGHTS can fly through, or top-down sections where you have to fly around in an area. You'll also have to make use of the dash and paraloop abilities in smart ways to save time and get extra points. The dash can make things faster, but can easily get NiGHTS to move so fast that you lose control, and the paraloop, which is done by flying in a circle, can be used to take out enemies or gather all the stars and orbs in its range. The paraloop also functions in a 3D space, so you can use it to grab objects that are slightly out of your range. When objects are paralooped, they magnetize the NiGHTS, which can also be used to drag them along and extend your link. Links are the game's combo system, where you'll earn extra points for gathering objects or flying through rings within a second of each other. Mixing all of these together can really be satisfying as you gain speed and learn the track well enough to fly through it and get high ranks. This is one of those games that I think you could get disgustingly good at with enough time and knowledge. And while I'm not the greatest at NiGHTS in the world, I did manage to get a few A's and B's on individual tracks and managed those C ranks in every course. The C's get degrees, right? With all the C ranks earned, it was finally off to Twin Seeds, which is the final level. This stage is set in the city where the 2 children live, and so it works a little differently than the other stages. To start, you get thrown away from NiGHTS by Wiseman, and with nothing left to do, you have to take a leap of faith. I really loved this little bit of storytelling through gameplay, and I like that it made me take that leap of faith myself, instead of it playing out in some cutscene. Twin Seeds, the stage, is a quick dash through 4 tracks with next to no time left to spare. It's frantic, exciting, and the music swells and adds a lot of magic to it. It's also nice to look at. I should have mentioned it earlier, but the presentation in NiGHTS Into Dreams is overall pretty great. With the assumption that it's a Saturn game, the visuals are amazing, and the music is really catchy too. Running on original hardware, the video quality doesn't properly align with how good the game might look on a CRT, but I think that the game makes up for its shortcomings with color and charm. I am looking for a better capture method for Saturn, and if you have any suggestions, feel free to let me know. Speaking of the visual design, I think it's also worth mentioning the promotional renders that they did for NiGHTS. I'm definitely a fan of some of the old 3D artwork they used to promote the game. Everything is very flat and smooth shaded, but it's also very clean to look at because of it. The render with knights in Twin Seeds that they used for the American box art is honestly really eye-catching. A lot of the artwork they made for Nights into Dreams I think shows off that mid-90s 3D tech at its best. Anyway, after reaching the end of Twin Seeds, Elliot has to team up with Claris and defeat Wiseman. It's a simple boss fight that's over before you know it, as long as you understand what's going on. Defeating Wiseman gives Elliot the courage to wake up in the next morning and win his basketball game, but that isn't the true ending. Since this game has two main characters, you have to play the game once again with Claris. Since I did both stories at the same time, I had to go through the last level twice, but it's not a big deal. So after finishing the game with Claris, I got the true ending. She handles the audition, of course, like in her regular ending, but there's a bonus scene where Elliot stumbles upon her concert, and they're teleported to NiGHTopia again. After the credits, she wakes up and catches a glimpse of knights out in the moonlight. The world of Nights into Dreams is very abstract, but the story it's trying to tell is pretty straightforward. It's a creative setting with a surprising amount of thought and effort put into it, and it really feels like there's more going on that you just aren't deliberately shown. I really love how there aren't any clear answers about what or why Nights even exists. And these two kids just have a shared delusion that eventually leads to them meeting each other. Some of this stuff is more spelled out for you if you read the extra material, like the manual or books that they released at the time. But I also like how simple and abstract it is in the original game. This brings us to the end of Nights into Dreams, but not to the end of Nights on the Saturn, since during the winter of 1996, Sega released Christmas Nights into Dreams, so let's take a look at that.
セガサターン
プレゼントは何かな
きっとセガサターンだわ今買うとクリスマスナイツがついてるんだよねあなたパパ
セガサターンはクリスマスナイツキャンペーン
Christmas Nights into Dreams is kind of an interesting piece in Sega history. Sonic Team was always messing around with these sort of timed event-style editions, with their Sonic Adventure games having some holiday features as well. Christmas Nights might seem like a novelty, but it's actually got a surprising amount of hidden content inside. Throwing the game in normally, it presents itself as Nights Limited Edition, a short demo of the first level from the main game. But if you play the game with the Saturn's calendar set to December, the game enters Christmas Nights mode, and you can play through the entire level with a special reskin and music track. Playing the game on Christmas itself takes it a step further and plays some Christmas carols. This would be enough for a bonus sample disc, but Nights goes even further than that, featuring a whole plethora of other things for other times of the year. Playing on April Fools turns Nights into their rival Riala, and playing the game in February gives the kids winter jackets instead of their Christmas outfits. Along with that, playing the demo will give you a chance to unlock bonus features that they call presents. These presents come in the form of art galleries, karaoke modes, and much more. The only issue is that actually getting to play these modes can be pretty tedious. Changing the calendar back and forth is a real hassle, so trying to force the game to show you the cool stuff takes a lot of time, and if you wanted to unlock every present, it means playing the same demo of the game dozens of times, just to play this card flipping minigame to get what you want. If you're unlucky like I am, you can flip a Riala card and that'll just boot you out of the unlock screen, preventing you from getting anything. And if you play the demo during the Christmas season, it could also put you to the ending video, which is unskippable and just wastes time.
It seems like nobody is paying any attention to something important.
Thankfully, I was only really after one present in particular. On the third set of cards, you can unlock Sonic into Dreams as a special bonus feature exclusive to the Saturn. This is a really cool version of the demo where you play as Sonic running around in a level in 3D, similarly to how Elliot and Claris can, but at a much faster pace. You aren't able to play the flying sections as Sonic, but his jump is increased in height to let you grab orbs that way. He also doesn't control all that well, and you can't really do much other than run around in circles and jump, but it is entertaining to see it in action. After you do the 4 tracks, there's also a new boss fight against a Christmassy Eggman, which is a reskin of the Puffy boss fight from the main game. Seeing this demo in action is really cool because it's actually one of the very first times Sonic was playable in 3D. Not counting things like Sonic 3D Blast, this is probably the first genuine 3D polygon Sonic that's playable in an officially released game. It's pretty rough around the edges, of course, but like most of Christmas Nights, it's a fun novelty. The only thing is, I can't help but feel like Christmas Nights should have been a part of the main game. Having these bonus unlockables when playing Nights into Dreams would have been great and helped a lot with the replay value. And later versions of Nights would do exactly that. On the PS2, there was a remastered version of Nights that never made it out of Japan, and that was used as the foundation for the HD re-releases that came out on Steam, PS3, and 360. I have the Steam version, which was unlisted a while ago, and it does seem to include a lot of these bonus features. Though for whatever reason, Sonic into Dreams isn't included in any of these. The PC port has widescreen and runs pretty well, so much so that I felt like the game was significantly easier to get high ranks on. I breezed through in less than 2 hours and got B ranks for every level without any trouble at all. I was thinking I probably should have played the game like this to begin with, but I will always prioritize the original hardware when possible. I would have recommended playing the game on Steam at this point, but Sega removed that game from sale in 2024. The Steam version does have some issues, but not having a real way to buy the game at all feels like a worse solution. I'll just have to hope that they plan to bring the game back in some other way. But that's pretty much all I have to say about the original Nights. I could go further into the weird A-Life stuff, but I looked into it and I really have no idea what that's about. It's sort of like a prototype Chow Garden based on what people say, but way more obtuse and doesn't really have an effect on gameplay. Playing the game myself, I didn't really even notice it until after I'd already beat the game. A-Life really just adds more to the strange mystique of Nights into Dreams, and feels like some crazy playground rumor stuff. Apparently it can change the music in the game, I can play a few versions of it here. It's really weird stuff. Nights is weird, you know? You know, I thought after putting a dozen hours into Nights into Dreams, I'd have a better grasp on what this game is all about. And while I know how to play Nights and I know what happens in the story now, the whole game is presented in a way that it just doesn't really want to tell you everything. Just learning about all this weird stuff after completing the game is kind of fascinating, right? It comes from a time where tucking away content from your game was almost common practice, like it was the thing to do. I saw photos of hearts raining on Valentine's Day, only to find out that it's not as simple as just playing the game on Valentine's Day. There's just a lot of stuff like that in Nights into Dreams. But still, I think it's a lot of fun, and it's worth at least taking a look at because it is such a short game. There isn't really anything else like it other than, of course, its sequel. So when I finished up on Nights on Saturn, I had to jump right into Nights Journey of Dreams for the Wii, and we can get to that next. In the late 2000s, there seemed to be one last push from Sega to make Knights relevant. In the decades since the first game, the lead designer Takashi Iizuka had become a leading member of Sonic Team, and he never stopped expressing his own interest in returning to Knights. Those small cameos carried through to the Wii generation, eventually culminating in a sequel for the Wii in 2007. Though despite the clear passion for the game and project, I think Journey of Dreams probably wasn't as much of a success as Sega had hoped. I feel like I saw this game in Walmart discount bins back in the late 2000s. And it must have been the case because you can find new copies of the game for relatively cheap. Maybe I was just lucky, but I found my copy brand new at a game convention for $15. I must admit though, it was very satisfying to crack open a brand new Wii game after all these years. I have the impression that Journey of Dreams just wasn't as well received, but I feel like sometimes Wii games got a bad rap just for being on the Wii, so I kinda have to see for myself. From the get-go, it looks fantastic. The absolute joy expressed on the cover artwork, key art, and intro video were plenty enough to get me excited to dig in. And props to the developers for updating Knights' design so well. I talked a little bit about it before, but it feels like a proper fulfillment of the Knights design. The characteristic strangeness is still there, and the court jester look feels just more realized. They're also animated in such a satisfying way in this intro video. It really just took a cool idea and gave it proper life. It's probably in large part due to the decade of advancement in tech between this and the Saturn game, but I think the argument still stands. Starting the game off, the good impressions continued. Journey of Dreams is a bit of a retelling of the first game with a new set of kids named Will and Helen this time, with their own troubles. It's just that this boy plays soccer and this girl plays violin instead of basketball and singing. There's a lot of retread from familiar concepts, reused music, and other aspects, but really I was just okay with that in the beginning. It felt really great to fly around and see what a Knights game could look like on some better hardware. Moving around and dashing feels nearly identical, and the game thankfully lets you play with whatever control scheme you want. You can use pointer controls, a nunchuck, pro controllers, or the GameCube controller. I'm recording this off a Wii U, so I couldn't use the GameCube controller myself, and stuck mostly with the classic controller or nunchuck. They work just fine. In the tutorial, I was really happy to just fly around. It's fundamentally the same, but definitely has a bit more of a refined control scheme. I'm sure fans that played the game when it first came out must have been pretty pumped to see those orange rings again. Even for myself, I was pretty excited to see them. So the gameplay is realistically identical to the mechanics in the first game, but eventually I would find that the additions made on top of that existing gameplay were a bit more concerning.
That wasn't bad for your first time. Let's get back to the Dream Gate.
Let's dig into the story. While the plot is basically the same as the first game, the way it's presented has changed a lot. The game features full voice acting for all of the characters and cutscenes that really expand on the world set up in Nights into Dreams. This, in my opinion, though, is a double-edged sword. I really preferred how Nights was previously depicted. Likely due to restrictions in technology, it felt much more mysterious and abstract, and the whole story was delivered in short clips without much dialogue getting in the way. In Journey of Dreams, though, every little thing is explained. Nightopia is a place in the night dimension. Knights and the kids dualize to fly around, and each color I have idea does a very specific thing and is very clearly explained.
World of Dreams? Nightopia? Do you realize? What do you mean?
All of these things were pretty much in the first game, but the way it's delivered here really bridges into that Saturday morning cartoon territory. I'm pretty sure the fun cartoon vibe was the intention all along, but these cutscenes just don't do it for me. There are just so many things in the world of Knights that don't really need an explanation and instead just get one for the sake of it.
I don't really know exactly what it is myself, but they say it can destroy a visitor's soul. And then, They'll never be able to return here again.
Oh my.
And the fact that Knights talks really took me by surprise. I had this idea in my head that they were just one of those characters that flies around, messes with people, and stays mysterious. Like they're an entity that just is, and not really a person in the traditional sense. But here, Knights is very clearly a character with thoughts and feelings that go deeper than fly around and cause trouble. By the end of the game, I kind of got used to it, but even then, I kind of grew to dislike the interpretation. It wasn't really the direction I would have expected or wanted, and that mystique from the first game is kind of just gone. I think there's something to be said about how a lot of older games caused people nowadays to misinterpret what the intention was from the first place, and I definitely felt that here. At least this expanded story meant that Riala got to be a proper counterpart to Knights. In the first game, they're just a boss that happens to look the same, but here, Riala will show up and communicate with Wiseman behind the scenes in order to try and capture Knights or do other nefarious things. They're really hammy in that classic cartoon villain way, and so if you see it from that lens, I think it's pretty fun. Also, their battle music slaps. The two children also have a much more involved role here. They have conversations with this new character Owl and Knights throughout the story between levels. The two stories are happening at the same time, just like in the first game, but here the two of them will actually interact with each other at points other than the ending. I can't say Will or Helen are interesting characters by any means, but these games really are about them more so than they are about Knights, and so giving them a more active role makes a lot of sense. One last nitpick about the dialogue though. So in the first game they had the concept of ideas, which were spelt I-D-E-Y-A, so I thought it was an idea, like ideas. Well, it turns out that's pronounced idia apparently, so my bad.
Oh, come on. Enough with the explanations. Let's just go check it out.
Here on the Wii, Knights has also gotten a whole bunch of new additions to the gameplay. To start, worlds no longer follow the structure of the first game, and instead are broken up into 5 individual stages. The first stages are the closest to the original game, starting with Knights trapped in a cage to be set free by Will or Helen, after which you have to destroy said cage by catching a bird and then using that key to break it open. Other levels have some variety, but most of them include a linking challenge, a gimmick level like this boat stage, and a boss battle. Like I said at the start, controlling Knights in Journey of Dreams feels great and just as good as in the original game. Flying through rings, collecting orbs, it's all there, but I eventually realized that there's been a shift in how the stages are built. Generally, there are a lot fewer alternate paths than there were in the first game, and the trick system with the rings that activate it seem to be entirely for the fun of it now. Level design is much more focused on speed and flow instead of score building, which reminded me a lot of Sonic Team's main series, where the Sonic Adventure formula with exploration gave way to the boosting games. Overall, I think the stages here are fun and creative in their own right, but I can't shake the feeling that there's something lost in the transition. It feels great and looks great, but there's a lingering sense to me that without the score system, the levels feel a lot simpler. There's almost a feeling that every level in Knight's Journey of Dreams is more like a set of disjointed minigames. Because of the increased variety, occasionally you'll get thrown a curveball that would just break the momentum. There's a much bigger emphasis on the two kids, and they both have these really long platforming levels that you just have to play through to get back to the fun Knights stuff. It's not the best to be playing as Knights for 4 minutes and then having to play as Helen walking around in circles for twice that time. When it was just doing what NiGHTS does best, I was having just as much fun as on the Saturn, but when it wasn't, I was kinda just waiting for it to be over.
NiGHTS! I've got to find NiGHTS!
It had me thinking a lot about what I would have liked to see in a sequel to NiGHTS, and a bit about how games like this kind of struggled in this generation. Focusing a game on high scores just wasn't gonna cut it in the PS360 era, but I think a focus on having fun new ways to play the established gameplay would have been a lot better. Instead, there are a bunch of these side objectives that are converted into main objectives, which find a way to pad out the runtime. I would have loved to see the trick system integrated into the gameplay loop a bit more, like maybe you could do acrobatics to round off combos or something. Because of how simple NiGHTS is to control, I think that it leaves a lot to the level design to make it work, and maybe adding 1 or 2 new moves would have helped alleviate that. Another thing would have been to simply just add 1 score attack level in every world. Doing that would just make things feel a lot more similar to that original game. I thought about my issues with Journey of Dreams, and I think it really comes down to just unwanted or poorly thought out gimmicks. I'm not against the concept of gimmicks, and they can be a huge help in level design. Stages in the first game had plenty of gimmicks, but they were always a means to an end, and usually only made up a portion of the level. Meanwhile, in the sequel, the gimmicks are often included in the first level and then separated into their own levels. Because of this separation of gimmicks and stages, the gimmick levels feel like mandatory minigames. And the gimmicky concepts, when they don't work, make it even more frustrating. Let me complain to you about this chameleon boss. So his whole deal is that you have to paraloop the background in order to clear this area up to find them. You just have to find them. Sounds easy enough, but it's entirely random. You could spend the entire timer looking for this guy, listening to them laugh at you while you get hit by bombs that stun you, and just never find them. I don't know if there was any rhyme or reason to finding where they are exactly, but eventually I realized that you can just spot where they're going in the very beginning and then finish the boss in seconds. So not only is this a frustrating boss concept, but it's also incredibly easy to exploit. Gimmicks in Journey of Dreams can be tied to your win conditions, and so it makes the game more frustrating than it needs to be. Take this music note gimmick in Helen's story. It's a great idea where you can hit these notes in a row to play a song, and then that'll earn you some score in the main level. But here, there's also a level dedicated to it. It isn't the hardest stage ever, but the angle of the camera made it way more difficult than it needed to be to just keep a straight line. And if you're off timing, you don't get any points towards getting a good rank. It was just confusing and hard to understand what exactly I was doing wrong, and I realized that if you miss the notes, then you lose, but if you don't time the notes, then you're fine. The little timer bar that's supposed to show you when you would get points doesn't even seem to line up properly. And I really just don't think NiGHTS' movement was ever built for this sort of precision. The chameleon boss, these music notes, and other annoying levels in this game aren't impossible or anything, they're actually far from difficult, but it's often more trouble than it needs to be. It's just not as fun as flying around in the main stages. The chase and link levels can feel really fun in this game, but then you always have to do the occasional annoying boss battle or gimmick stage or kid platforming stage. And if you're a Sonic fan, you'll know that these problems were exactly the same as the issues on Sonic Unleashed and other Sonic games at the time. One addition that I was aware of before playing the game were these mask transformations that allow NiGHTS to take the form of a rocket or a dolphin or a serpent. They are fun ideas, but they're surprisingly not used very often. The dolphin is used in a few stages, but the rocket and serpent, as far as I can tell, are only really required for a few boss battles. Despite the foundation of Journey of Dreams being so good, so many of these strange choices I found got in the way of having a really great NiGHTS experience. Don't get me wrong, I was still having fun playing those main levels, but again, they're just not quite as good as the Saturn ones. Eventually, I got through the stories for each of the children, and they both end nearly identically to the stories in the first game. NiGHTS gets taken away, they stand up for themselves, jump into the darkness in their hometown, fly around, and save Knights. It took me way too long to notice how much in common Knights has with Peter Pan. The first game was set in more of an American-style city, but the town in the sequel is very clearly inspired by London, which really emphasizes the Peter Pan-ness. Not that it really matters, but it's interesting to see the parallels. The level is pretty great, but coming off of Nights into Dreams, I think the experience is a bit played out already. Still, it's a great ending that worked in the first game, and it works pretty well here too. After that, you play through an eerily similar final encounter with Wiseman, and that takes you to the credits. Just like in the first game, getting at least a C rank in every level will unlock the true ending. This was a lot easier for me because the ranking system here feels a bit more generous, so I really only had to play through a few boss fights before I could return to do the final level again. The true ending is nearly the same as in the Saturn game, but instead Knights reveals that they have to sacrifice themselves to truly get rid of Wiseman for good. In their regular endings, Will and Helen don't remember Knights, but in the true ending, their memories are intact, and they get to meet again in the real world just as it starts to snow. Once again, though, it seems that Knights is still out there. Knight's Journey of Dreams isn't the Forgotten Gems sequel that I had hoped it would be, but it isn't all that bad either. It doesn't quite have the early 3D charm of the first game, or its frantic score-chasing gameplay, but it does have a much more polished presentation. I have my gripes with the way the story is delivered and the gameplay, but it would be unfair of me to say that this sequel has no merit on its own. Knights in their world are much more substantial and realized here, and the gameplay when it works is just as tight as the originals. It's also got a great soundtrack and a pretty good visual design. That A-Life stuff also returned in this one, in the form of this weird Chow Garden type thing that I honestly opened once and just walked away from. I'm sure there's some really cool stuff in there, but I just didn't really have the time to do it. I think that if you played this maybe when you were younger, it probably would be really nostalgic for you, and I'm glad that I spent the time to go through it myself.
There's so much inside. In the night's dream delight, I want to see you standing there. In the night's dream delight, I found someone who really cares.
In 2002, Electronic Gaming Monthly listed Nights into Dreams as their 61st greatest game ever made in their list of the top 100 best games ever. Sadly though, I don't think these days it would make it anywhere close to the top 100. Partly due to it falling into obscurity, but also because Sega doesn't even allow most people to play this game anywhere. Nights into Dreams was delisted from all digital storefronts, and the Wii sequel hasn't been re-released since it launched in 2007. But having played these games now, I think that Nights deserves better. These games are incredibly creative and they have such a sincere outlook on life. Sometimes I think we just need the weird games. Not everything can be a flawless masterpiece that appeals to everybody. Games like NiGHTS stand out because they're so different and they're really just their own thing. After playing these games, you realize that there really isn't anything else like it. They're platformers without platforms, side-scrollers in a 3D space, and they really sit in their own genre of side-scrolling, flying, score attack platformers. I think I'd also be remiss to not mention Balan Wonderworld, which tried to capture the magic of NiGHTS and basically failed in every conceivable way. They were trying to promote the game with a lot of the key players from the original NiGHTS series returning, but without Izuka, I think that it just was never going to be the same. Every weird thing that Balan did, I think actually makes a lot more sense after playing NiGHTS. Despite its development being so interesting, I think it's actually going to be kind of forgotten in just a few more years. When it comes to NiGHTS though, I would love to see Sega take a new look at this franchise and try to revive it with something new that can take advantage of modern graphics and gameplay. Or they could at least start by porting those original games. Either way, I just hope that Sega can find a way to bring back NiGHTS and give it another shot. That brings us to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and if you did, drop a like on the video and leave a comment below. Are you a fan of NiGHTS, or are you just curious about it like I was? If you want to see more videos like this one in the future, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and you can ring the bell so that YouTube can pretend to send you notifications. I also feel the need to mention that if you know somebody who might be interested in this video, please feel free to share it, because that stuff helps out a lot more than you might think. Either way, any of those things, even just watching the video to the end like you have, means that this channel can continue to stay afloat. With all that out of the way, thanks one more time for watching the video, and have a good night.